Thank you all so much for being here tonight. As always, if you can keep your cameras on, yourself muted so the background noise is not disturbing to our speaker. And I'm super excited about what Mr. Jones has to share with us tonight on media literacy. Terry, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and then jump right in, and I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, but I'm here. Sometimes they drop questions in the chat box, so I'll let you know if they do that. And would you like them to raise their hand, interrupt you, wait till question and answer time? How would you like that?
Um, yeah, if anybody has any questions as we're going, just raise your hand, and I'll try to finish my thought and then get to you, and then there'll be time to ask any questions at the end as
Okay,
well, I think.
perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and let you roll.
Okay, my name is Terrence Jones, and I am an attorney. I practice law here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I primarily practice real estate law, and in that, I have a lot of opportunity to investigate documents and records and the things people say, and look into whether they really have any basis on which they should know the things they're talking about. And so I feel like I've developed some skill in learning who to believe and who not, and kind of parsing through that. So my goal tonight is for me to give you some of those skills, so that as you're receiving media of all different kinds, you can figure out for yourself whether or not it's something you should trust, something you should discard, something you can share and feel good about, or something that might just be an out and out lie, because there's plenty of that going around. At any time, if I get quiet, just wave at me, somebody, and I will try to speak up so that everybody can hear me well. First thing I want to do is there's a little clip from Phineas and Ferb that I think really illustrates the attitude of a lot of people. So I'm going to share my screen now. Unfortunately, I can't get the video to work, but the audio should come through. And here, let's do this.
And stop interrupting me. Anyway, I've done lots of research for the past, few hours, and I found out that most people will believe anything they read. And I know it's true because, I read it online somewhere. So, my new weapon to take over the tri-state area is propaganda.
Propaganda. That's kind of the thing that we have to fight against, right? It's the thing that is out there all the time, and it's something that you can kind of cut through with some skills. So here, I'm going to share to my my slideshow here, and we'll get started. So this is about media literacy, and it's about countering something called that's been called truth decay. So let's talk about what this problem of truth decay really is, and what it looks like. The excuse me. Truth decay is this scenario where facts and data and analysis is playing less and less of an important role in our political and civic discourse. And what does that mean? That sounds like a lot of words, but that means that by and large, people don't care what the truth is, or they seem to act in a way that they don't care what the truth is. There's increasing disagreement between people about which facts are true and how to interpret those facts and data. There's this declining trust in sources that we used to trust all the time, things like news media and things like that. There's a blurred line between opinions and fact. Sometimes that line can be really difficult to find. And there's also an increasing relative influence of opinion and personal experience over facts. So that's kind of the problem. And this is another cartoon that I think really illustrates this problem. Now, in this first slide, it says the internet makes it easy to be a jerk and forget the person we're talking to is a human. Here, you could substitute to share misinformation and forget that the person we're talking to should get true information. And the woman responds, yeah, but it also makes us see messages from awful people and assume they come from normal people, normal peers. Um, and then if you go through the punchline here is that she was doubting herself because something that the East Valley Strangler was saying. But I think it really speaks to some of this problem too, because sometimes you read things online and they make you doubt whether you even know what the truth is anymore, because there's so many people that will tell you that there is no such thing as something that is a fact or can be confirmed or anything. And it's kind of like this lake slayer, right? There's a review out there, and he says that he got food poisoning at this other restaurant, but you should go down to the lake instead. Well, the lake slayer, he's obviously biased. He wants people to come down to the lake, so he's got some targets, right? So media literacy is the thing that we use to fight some of this truth decay. And media literacy, I think we just had somebody join. Media literacy fights against truth decay because it gives you some skills that you need to be able to access, analyze, evaluate, and even create using all forms of communication. So there's 4 real key skills here. And so a person who really works on their media literacy seeks to have a complete understanding of the facts of a situation so that they can formulate their opinions about it. That person identifies trustworthy sources of information, and we'll talk about some skills that help with that. It evaluates credibility of information and the soundness of arguments. So we're not really interested in saying that because an argument comes from a particular person we don't like, we're going to ignore it. We're looking at the merits of the argument that they're making itself. And the person who has good media literacy engages with media in a responsible way. They don't share information that is either obviously untrue or that is something that they don't have any idea whether it's true or not. All right. So those are the key skills, but what does it really look like? Well, first of all, it is critical thinking about all media and all messages that you receive. So what does that mean? That means it's an understanding that all the messages you receive through media, through the television, through the newspaper, through social media websites like TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, Twitter, it means advertising that you see on billboards. These are all messages that are constructed. These things don't happen in a vacuum. They don't just pop into existence. They're made for a reason. And it's thinking critically about what those reasons are. That helps us to understand what it is that the creator is trying to tell us. Media literacy respects the diversity of experiences. So my experience is different than someone who's grown up in Europe or in Africa, and their experiences are going to be a filter through which they receive that media. And that difference is real, and it needs to be respected. With that being said, there's also a difference between facts and opinions or personal experience. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Continuing, media literacy looks like continuing the development of skills, right? This is not something that is you either have it or you don't. This is something that you can get better at, and that as you have more and more experience with these things, you can get better at understanding media. I'll give an example here. In my law practice, I get a lot of phishing emails. These are scam emails that come in, and they are seeking different ways to try to get money from my law firm. And this one time I got this email, and it's claimed to be from the CEO of a Japanese company. And he said in this email that he was going to be purchasing a dredging machine that was on the Tennessee River, and they needed a local attorney to help them with that process. Well, that all sounds pretty good, and it would fit within my practice doing these kind of transactions. But something didn't fit right with the company, and so I started looking into it, and I was able to look into it because I had some experience with some of these types of emails in the past. And I gradually figured out that, first of all, this company had an American division that would almost certainly be the person who would be contacting me, not the CEO from Tokyo, Japan. The name was right. The company was a real company that existed. The name that was on the email was the name of the CEO. But the email address came from a random Gmail email address. And it just seemed to me that a company large enough to engage in that kind of business would have its own domain name, its own, .com or what have you. And so eventually I figured out that this was a scam and I was able to get rid of it. But that was really based on some experiences that I had up to that point. And you all will gain these experiences as you work through some of these media issues. And then the last thing is, the media literacy is an understanding that we can have different interpretations of media. Media can affect us in different ways, and neither of us has to be wrong in that situation. It's not binary, right? It's you have your experience and I have mine. So what's not media literacy? Well, not media literacy would be my way or the highway. You have to deny your experience of an event and accept my experience as the definitive correct way to look at something. It's not about declaring that all media is good or bad. It's about looking at each piece of media separately, and also looking at each author separately. Sometimes you look at the body of an author's work, and we can figure out that they're either a generally good source or a generally bad source. But we're still going to look at each new article or meme that gets posted, separately and examine it on its own merits. It's not about deciding which media is biased and which isn't. So one of the things that somebody with good media literacy understands is that all media is biased. And it's our job as the consumer of the media to decide whether or not the bias is getting in the way of the message or changing the message or making it a message that we decide is not trustworthy. So that's one thing. I mean, just understand everybody's got an angle and everybody always has something they really want from you when they send out a message. We just have to figure out what it is. And the last thing is media literacy is not partisan. It's not political. We're not going to say Republicans good, Democrats bad, Democrats good, Republicans bad. We're not going to get into that. We're going to look at the message that's given and try to look at it on its merits. So I think I'll ask a question here. Let me stop sharing so I can see everybody's faces. Does anybody have any idea how we might figure out whether a piece of media is something that we can trust or not? Awesome kid.
You could look at whether or not a lot of different people are saying the same thing.
Right. We could look for consensus. Right. Can you think of an example of that?
If everybody said that the word "the" is an article, then it's probably an article.
Okay. I mean, I think someplace this might come up is a lot of scholarly science writing builds consensus, right? Somebody has an idea, they test it, they produce that evidence to other people, other scientists who look at it, and they decide whether or not they think it's trustworthy. And the more people that think it's trustworthy, there'll be more writing about it that will eventually agree that the material is good and trustworthy material. So that's a great example of building consensus and looking to see is this viewpoint kind of an outlier, or is it something that a lot of people agree with? What other questions might we ask about a piece of media that help us figure out whether we can trust it? Okay, that's okay. we'll go here. I'll go back to sharing, and we'll keep looking. Okay, so we got to ask questions. We're going to ask ourselves lots of questions. So, like I said before, the first thing we have to understand is the media is constructed. Everything is constructed. Nothing just pops into existence on its own. So the first question is, who made this media? Who made it, and why did they make it? Are they looking for a particular audience? So if I put out a meme and I put it on TikTok, right, then I'm probably looking to communicate with a certain age group of people that look at TikTok, right? I'm 40 years old. I don't have a TikTok account. I don't really know anything about it other than what filters through to YouTube. So you're probably not talking to 40-year-olds if you're using TikTok, probably. I'm sure there's some 40-year-olds that are on TikTok. Likewise, you're all too young to remember MySpace, but before Facebook, there was MySpace, and there was a very narrow band of ages where MySpace was a big deal, and it aged out. But you would use MySpace to talk to certain people. If you want to talk to people that are into investing and money management, then you might write an article and try to put it into the Wall Street Journal, because that's where those people are reading their media. If you wanted to write a medical study, then you would try to publish it in a medical scholarly journal, and you would expect that other doctors would be reading that, and that's where you would target your audience. Another important question is: has everybody ever heard this the statement "follow the money"? So, follow the money is a very important concept here. Who paid for the media? Who benefits from the media? Right? Who paid for the message to get there, and who stands to gain money or influence from the media? And kind of with that, who's harmed by a piece of media? A few years ago, maybe just 1 or 2 years ago, there was a big story that some of you might have heard about, where an actor named Jussie Smollett claimed that he had been attacked. He's a black gentleman, by white supremacists in Chicago, just out on the street. And he got a lot of favorable press coverage, and people were, saying that he needed to be supported, and his acting career started to, look like it was on the rise. And it was later determined that that was a complete lie, that he had not been attacked by white supremacists at all. And there was some indication that he had set the whole thing up. Well, so when we're looking at that story, where does that story break down? A broad daylight attack by white supremacists in the middle of Chicago seems kind of far-fetched. And who benefited from that? Well, Mr. Smollett benefited from that. So, that's one of those things that we can look at: who benefits, who's harmed. Another question we can ask ourselves is, what does the person who made the media want me to do when I receive that media, right? Do they want me to learn something? Do they want me to share something? Do they want me to believe something that's not true? Do they want me to vote in a particular way? I mean, is the message a political message? I mean, it's possible that, I said I wasn't going to get into, parties and whether things were good or bad, but political communications are definitely media that we have to be critical about and decide what we can believe and what we can't. And political media is generally going to be aimed at getting us to vote in a certain way or donate money in a certain way, and change the way we're handling ourselves and our finances and our governance to comply with it. Another important question: how can I participate in a constructive way? Right? If I come across something and I look into it and I find out that it's completely untrue, then do I share that anyway? Do I try to refute it? Do I argue with the person who shared it with me? There's times and places for all those different responses, but you want to make sure that you're being interacting with media in a constructive way. And finally, are my emotions influencing the way I interpret the media? That it's true that as you gain experience, you're also going to gain your own biases. And if you have determined that a given author is not been truthful in the past, then that might affect the way you receive their messages in the future. Here, we're going to go just one more slide of these questions, and then we're going to go back to you guys getting some information here, or talking with me a little bit. What does the media want me to learn or remember in the future? What is the point of view of the media, right? They might have a very specific point of view that maybe I don't agree with, or I don't share, and so or I don't understand for some reason. What has been left out that might be important? That's a very important piece of this whole conversation. If a news article reports that there were 500 counter protesters at an event, but doesn't tell you how many protesters there were in the first place, they're leaving out a pretty significant piece of information that you might want to dig a little bit deeper and try to learn. You can ask yourself, how might someone with a different background interpret the message? I think a great example of this is the whole debate between on one side the slogan Black Lives Matter, and on the other side the slogan All Lives Matter. If you look at that from the point of view of a Black person, then the Black person might feel that their race is currently in crisis. And I heard it explained once that if you've got 5 children and only one of them is in a burning house, then you're probably going to leave the 4 kids outside where it's safe and try to get the one child out of the burning building. And at that moment, all the kids' lives matter. Yeah, that's true. But that one child's life is the priority because that's where the crisis is. And so there's some debate when you hear Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. The point of view of the folks that support Black Lives Matter is, well, Black folks are currently in crisis and need help. Now, again, I'm not here to say whether that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's a different viewpoint, and it's something that needs to be considered. Couple of other important points. When was the media made? There's this whole concept of zombie news that happens. I don't know how many of you have Facebook accounts, but regularly news articles will be shared as if they're new information. And when you look at them, right on the news article, when you click through into the website, there's a date at the top of the article that says it's 3, 4, 10 years old. It's not new information, and it can lead to all kinds of confusion and everything else. For example, a lot of times missing children reports will go around over and over and over again years after that missing child case has been resolved one way or the other. And it just gets everybody, looking for a child that's already been found. When or how was the media shared with the public? Was it leaked through some strange source? Was it posted on a website that was created just for the purpose of sharing that information? Did it come through an established news source? Did the person who shared the information give their real name as being responsible for the creation of the media? The circumstances of how the information gets out is important. And finally, is the media stating facts or opinions? Well, let's talk about facts and opinions a little bit. All right, so does everybody have paper and pencil or some way to write something down? Maybe you can type it on a notepad or something. Yes? I would like for you to write down with as much specificity as you can what your perfect day looks like, with weather on a perfect day looks like. Okay? So if I said, man, the weather is great today, What does that mean to you? Right. Now, has everybody had a chance to write something down? Okay. Who wants to tell me what their perfect day looks like? Allie, go ahead.
85 degrees outside with sunny and a few clouds.
Sunny and food. Okay, 85 degrees. Okay. Jackson, what's your perfect day look like?
I haven't got a chance to write yet.
Okay, you're still writing. Okay. Hey Blake, you go ahead.
Sunny without any clouds, around 75 degrees and breezy.
75. Okay. Izzy, what about you?
Sunny.
Sunny. Okay. Do you have an idea of what temperature you like it to be?
No, sir.
Okay. Grace.
Windy, a little bit of rain in the afternoon, cool, sunny, some clouds, probably like 80 degrees.
Okay. Jackson, have you got something written down? No. He's still at Jake. You want to go?
I put sunny with a nice cool wind and the temperature is 75.
Okay. So the boys like it a little bit colder than the girls so far. Let's see what Jackson has to say.
$78 degrees, small breeze, and no wasps.
No wasps. Okay. So you see, you see how everybody's idea of what a nice day or a perfect day was a little bit different, right? What you guys gave me were facts, right? We can measure the temperature and record it. It can be tested. We can double check it later. It can be recorded and put it in an almanac so we know what it was down the road. But when I say it's a perfect day, all of you had a different picture in your mind of what that really means, and none of you had exactly the same thing as what my idea of a perfect day would be, which is a little bit warmer, maybe 82, 83, and enough clouds so we don't get sunburnt and warm enough to get in the pool. All right. So none of you had the same idea as me. All of you had different ideas, and none of us were wrong. Okay. But this illustrates the difference between facts and opinions. And we have to be really careful when we're reading. And this has really gotten difficult over the last 10 or 15 years. More and more often, even established news sources are stating opinions and not facts. Okay. So when we can boil down to facts, then we know we're all operating on the same basis, and we can start having conversations about how to interpret those facts. Productive conversations. We're not just yelling at each other the way kind of public discourse happens right now. Great, thanks guys. That was really good. All right, we're gonna go back here. Okay, so why are these questions and more questions? I mean, this is just the beginning of the questions, but why are questions like these important? Well, they all go back to the key skills, right? Key skill number one was we're seeking a complete understanding of the facts. Well, to do that, we have to recognize the limits of our knowledge, and we have to understand that nobody can be an expert in everything, right? Going back to my law practice, I can learn an awful lot about new material on the fly, but I don't have enough time to develop real expertise in something. I don't have the time to go to school and learn the information. I don't have time to take a different job and gain the work experience of working with something else. And so there are holes in every person's knowledge. You can't know everything, and you have to understand that. But then we also use skills and strategies to fill those gaps. And sometimes that's going out to websites to get information. Sometimes that's talking to people that know what they're talking about. And a lot of those skills are pointed towards the second key skill, which is looking for trustworthy sources of information. So one of the biggest things there goes back to our very first question: who's writing the media? Who's creating it? Right? Is this a person with the expertise in the subject matter that they're talking about, so that we know we can trust them? And what does that expertise look like? Sometimes, if it's an academic area, then it might be, we're looking for somebody that has lots of degrees and education and has written scholarly articles and things. Sometimes it's a subject that it really has to be experienced to really understand it. I think one of the best examples of that is, I was never a soldier myself, but I've got a lot of military service in my family, and talking to those folks, I believe that no academic who has never been a soldier can really understand what it's like to be in a battle, right? If you wanted to know what it was like to be in a battle, you would need to find soldiers who had been in battles, veterans who had been in battles, and talk to them about that, right? The psychologist or the anthropologist or the military historian that has only ever talked to soldiers but never done it him or herself isn't going to know really what it was like. So another thing, when we're looking at trustworthy sources of information, we're looking to figure out, have they used a good process to develop their information? So what does that look like? Well, that could be for a scientific article, did they use good scientific method? Is their experiment repeatable? Do other people doing the similar experiment get similar results? Or can the experiment be debunked the first time somebody tries to repeat it? This is something, I don't know if anybody's following in the news. There's a trial going on right now for a woman who ran a company called Theranos, and she claimed to have made some pretty significant medical discoveries, and she was making those claims to gain investment money in her company, and it's turned out that they were all lies. They were all lies, and now she's on trial for fraud because she essentially stole money from people in order to put money in her own pocket, essentially. So that was all discovered when it came to light that no one else could repeat her results when they were trying to test whether or not she'd used good scientific process in the development of her work, or the claims that she was making. I always look for, is anyone else responsible for double checking the writer's work, right? In scientific writing, we're looking for something called peer review. That's where other scientists look at the work before it gets published and decide, yes, this was good process, or no, it wasn't. And a lot of this is reputational, right? Certain journals get reputations for publishing good material. And when they later find out that something was incorrect, then they have to retract it. And they get a lot of egg on their face about that. They don't like doing it, but it's the responsible thing to do. And good journals, trustworthy journals, you will see that occasionally they'll be retracting stories or articles because they've learned that the information was bad. I'd much rather see them retract the information than pretend that they've never made a mistake. In journalistic writing, this is news media and so forth, we're looking for, are there editors? Is this a podcast that has essentially one guy that's writing and performing the script, or is this the New York Times that has a whole editorial staff that is looking at an article through its production and telling the reporter, hey, you don't have enough sources, you need to go back and do some more research, you need to talk to these other people, you need to find out what the other side of the argument is saying, and make sure that it's all being put in. So there's these processes that we're really looking for that make the work trustworthy. You're also looking for trustworthy sources. What's the context of the article? Does the context, again, this goes back to that whole idea about is it a website that didn't exist before yesterday and has been published by an anonymous writer, or is it something that somebody's willing to claim the work for? The third skill is we're evaluating the credibility of information. So is it trustworthy? Is it a lie? Can we compare it to other viewpoints and come to some kind of consensus about what the truth is? And lastly, we're just trying to understand how we react to and engage with the media. So this is an awful lot of work. It sounds like an awful lot of work, and you get better at it. But when do we ask these questions? And the answer is all the time. This is another of my favorite cartoons. This one's called Wikipedian Protester. If you've ever spent time on Wikipedia, you've seen this citation needed prompt. And in this case, this person is interrupting the speech to say that he needs a citation. Well, I'm not saying that you need to go interrupt the speech, because that's a good way to probably get arrested, but it's just something to keep in mind, whether you're dealing with news media or print media, social media, podcasts, memes, conversations, advertising. It's always appropriate to test the media and the messages that you're being given to see whether or not they're really true. That kind of raises the question: can we trust anybody? Do you guys have any idea? Can we just are we just lost in the woods now? We're not able to trust anybody on the media. Anybody have an idea? Go ahead, Grace.
Well, even if you know that somebody's not true, then you still know something. You know that whatever they said isn't true.
Right. And if it's not true, then you might have learned something about why they're trying to lie to you about something, right? Well, here, let's go back. So some traditionally trustworthy sources, and I say traditionally trustworthy, meaning sources that a lot of these different protective things apply to, are listed here. So we've got large distribution newspapers, things like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Times. These why do we trust these newspapers? Well, for the most part, they've got a pretty strict journalistic process. So they have editors that are checking their work, and they have a lot of reputation on the line in making sure that they're publishing good material. The articles, now, this doesn't apply on these newspapers to the opinion page, right? The opinion page is pretty much anything goes. They're not stating facts. They're not reporting news. The opinion page is trying to convince you of whatever it is that particular author is trying to convince you of. And that needs to be taken with a grain of sand. But, if I read an article from the business section of the New York Times, then I can have a pretty safe belief that the journalist has gone through the right steps to ask questions of the people that they needed to be asked, and reported true information without really making anything up. Another thing is, all the articles in these big newspapers will have what are called bylines, meaning they will show who the author was. And when they show who the author is, especially if you're on the online version of these newspapers, you can go and pull up a list of all of that person's articles, and you can kind of decide for yourself whether they have a bone to pick with some particular subject. If they keep going back to the same thing over and over again, and they're casting somebody in a bad light over and over again, well, that might be a bias that you need to understand. The other thing is that large distribution newspapers, except for the New York Times, which got rid of their public editor a couple of years ago, they have someone called an ombudsman, or sometimes called a public editor. And this is the person that receives complaints from the public about the news that's been produced. And they investigate to see whether or not something's been published that's been not true. and they're responsible for going back to the journalist and making them fix it. So that correction is a really valuable thing for people who are wondering who to trust. Another traditionally trustworthy source is news agencies like Reuters and the Associated Press. These are reporters that don't work for any one particular newspaper, but because they have a good reputation, when they put something on the press wire, then it could get picked up from the Associated Press, for example, and published on hundreds of newspapers across the country. And so Reuters and the Associated Press typically have a pretty good reputation for being trustworthy sources. Government agencies are, it's not popular to say in these last few years, but government agencies are typically pretty trustworthy sources of information. The reason why, of course, is most of the time they don't have any reason to lie to you. When you think of, let's just use the COVID epidemic as an example. So what's the government saying? Well, sometimes what the government has said, this is the CDC or the Department of Health, has changed. Well, that's because science changes as things change. And much like those scientific journals that sometimes have to retract bad articles when they discover them, the CDC and the health department have to share information that they later determine is not the best information, and they change the story. They're not being duplicitous. They really don't have any reason to be duplicitous because, for the most part, they're not getting anything from the average person, right? The CDC or the health department has never gotten anything from anyone that I know personally. So this that. Large nonprofit corporations and think tanks. You have to. There could be some inherent biases because sometimes large organizations, say for example, St. Jude's Research Hospital, right? Their bias is curing childhood cancers, right? So they're going to argue for money to be spent on efforts to cure childhood cancers. They're going to argue that people should donate to the hospital. They're going to argue for putting a lot of other things aside and making a priority out of the eradication of child cancer. We know that going in because that's their whole purpose for existence is childhood cancer and getting rid of it. So we know that bias. So then we can look at what they are publishing, and we can have a pretty good understanding of where they're coming from and how true the material is that they're sharing. Another trustworthy source are scholarly journals or articles that are peer reviewed. Like I said, that's a very complicated process, and it's a rigorous process, and it's kind of a pain in the neck, frankly. Now there has been some claims of peer review, which is why you should always ask, what does peer review mean for that particular journal? It should mean that independent scientists or researchers have looked at the article and examined it and examined some of the data, the raw data underlying the article, to determine whether or not the article is the method is sound. They don't necessarily have to agree with the outcome, but the method is what they're testing. Universities, this is another source of scholarly journals and articles. And finally, research companies and think tanks. Think tanks are another one that can have a purpose kind of built in. And so you have to kind of understand that and look into what the company is and who they are. So the next question I've got for you is, what do you do with Wikipedia? Anybody have any idea? Right, everybody, that's kind of the elephant in the room these days. Allie, go ahead with Wikipedia. What do you got?
Well, I just say not to use it, but when I do, I like to double check all that I'm looking at and look at another source as well to make sure it matches up.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I partially agree. I use it a lot personally. Now, first thing I'm going to say about Wikipedia is if your teacher says don't use Wikipedia for a school project, then do what your teacher says, right? I'm not in control of that. For me, and what I have taught my kids is Wikipedia is a good source of a broad base of information about a new subject that I don't know anything about. The problem with Wikipedia is the same as its strength, which is, I don't know if anybody has ever edited a Wikipedia article, but anybody can go in and edit a Wikipedia article, right? So as long as it's not something that's controversial, then generally speaking, there's pretty good information there. When there is something that's controversial, for example, I looked up a football player that was playing in the Super Bowl one time, and someone had gone in and deleted the entire article and replaced it with one sentence that said, "So and so is a jerk," and that was his Wikipedia article. So so that's kind of the downside to Wikipedia. The other thing that Wikipedia is really good about is they have those citations at the bottom, and you can go to those. And a lot of times you can go through those to find trustworthy sources of information so you can verify. That's the part I really agree about with Ali. I would not cite to it directly. But if I, sometimes there's some concept or some type of project that's so foreign to me, I don't even know what questions to ask to do more research. So I can go to Wikipedia and get a broad base of information and learn some of the key terms for a new subject so I can go on and do more research that's targeted at the answers. So that's my recommendation for what you do with Wikipedia. And then the last thing, and then I want to do a little practical exercise, but I'm going to show you my red flags. So these are things that automatically have my radar up and make me very skeptical about a news source or a media source. So the first one is somebody taking credit for the media? Am I getting a real name of a real person and not some weird screen name that was only created yesterday, right? If nobody's taking credit for it, if they're not proud enough of their work to take credit for it, then I'm automatically skeptical of that information. Second one, I am always wary of sites that make their money by getting clicks, by getting views, or that are trying to sell me something. So, this doesn't really apply to newspapers. A lot of newspapers charge subscription fees. Those fees don't change what they report. They just pay the bills. So I'm not too skeptical about that. But if there's a clickbait article that's got some ridiculous thing in the headline and I click on it, I don't know, Marvel closes the MCU and doesn't make any more movies, and everybody's like clicking on that, right? Because they're interested to find out what happened. Well, and then you get in and you realize, oh, they're not making any movies today. Well, that's a red flag, right? You're not going to believe that. Number 3, how old is the website? If it's got some age on it, I'm more likely to believe it. If it's brand spanking new, then if the website is brand new, I'm skeptical. Articles is kind of the reverse, right? If the article is fairly new and says it's reporting current events, then I'm generally more ready to believe it. If it's an old article that's reporting old events, that's zombie news. Zombie news never dies. There's a Photoshop picture of a shark swimming through a street that goes around every time there's a hurricane in any southern city. And this picture makes its rounds on the news and on Facebook and everything else. And it never happened. There was never a shark swimming down a street in any city. It was Photoshopped in the first place, but it always comes back around over and over and over again for probably 5 years. It's been going around. So be very wary of zombie news. You can also be pretty quick to do a Google image search. In Google Chrome, if you right click on a picture, one of the little menu will pop up, and there's a button for Google image searching. And if you do that and Google finds a similar image, it'll tell you in what other articles that image has been used. So that's something you can use to try to figure out if you're looking at zombie news. Number 4, and this always gets me going. If someone is citing very specific statistics and they're not showing you their work or not showing you their sources, there's no way it's true. You know, if somebody comes to me and they're like, 76.4% of people did wash their hair with Suave shampoo last night. Well, there's no way. First of all, there's no citation. There's no way for them to know that. And they're just trying to support their ridiculous argument by giving numbers to it. But there's no way to verify that. So just like math class, you got to show your work, or I'm very skeptical about that. Number 5, what's the website look like? If it looks like an amateur made it, then it's probably an amateur made it, right? There's an awful lot of money put into graphic design and the setup of websites for a website to be very bad looking or very dated. You can also look at the language. Are there misspelled words? Are the sentences put together strange so the word order doesn't make sense? This could be a sign that you've got someone that doesn't speak English that's writing the material. This is what I get with these scam emails a lot. Even nowadays, they've got AI generated websites and videos on YouTube that are just looking for clicks and views because that's how they make their money. So they'll make these ridiculous things that just get people to click on the link. And the last thing for me that's a big red flag is name calling, right? Reputable news and media sources don't call names, right? For example, we subscribe to the New York Times. We read a lot of the New York Times. The whole time that Donald Trump was president, the Times was very clearly opposed to him on most of his policies. But never once did they call him anything but the president, President Trump, Mr. Trump, or just Trump. They never got into any name calling. Likewise, reputable news sources don't have pet names for people that are favorable. They just report the news. They just say who the person is. All right. So any questions before I do a little bit of a practical exercise? I see we're actually just about out of time. I'm gonna run through a little practical exercise real quick. Any questions? No? Okay. Let's. I'll see if I can do this really quickly so we don't run out of time. So one of the sources that I used for today's presentation was an article from the RAND Corporation called Media Literacy Standards to Counter Truth Decay. So let's look at this article and use some of this that I've talked about today. So this is the website where I found the article. And what's the first question? Well, the first question is, who wrote it? I wish I had time that I could have you guys answer some of these, but we're going to look at this. So right on the page, it's got all of the authors named right out. And I'm not able to show the links here, but each of these names is actually hyperlinked to a bio about the author that lists what their training was and experience. In some cases, some of these researchers also have teaching jobs at universities. Those are listed. Other articles that they've written, other commentary that they've done. So the RAND Corporation is showing us who it is that they have writing their material. And in this case, this article is about developing standards to use for teachers to teach media literacy. And the person that they have writing about it is a PhD in education policy. And she's also a fellow policy researcher with the RAND Corporation. So the next question is, okay, that's the individual authors, right? And then this is pretty standard of these other names that are here: Garrett Baker, Laura Hamilton, John Payne, and Alice Huguet. So then we ask, well, okay, well, who's the RAND Corporation? So what's RAND say about itself? Well, RAND is a policy think tank that dates all the way back to World War II. And you can get all this information on their About page on their website. RAND publishes its own standards for high quality research and analysis. And it has, these are just 4 of about 10 or 11 different bases or basic tenets of their research. But the things that they concentrate on are national security issues and the development of policy for the United States government and state governments. So they want the problem to be well formulated. The study approach should be well designed and executed. It should demonstrate an understanding of related studies. So they don't want researchers doing these experiments in a vacuum. They want researchers who know the information generally and are familiar with other studies of similar information. And they also want all of the assumptions to be explicit and justified. This means they're going to tell you what their assumptions are, and they're going to justify them. They're going to tell you why they made those assumptions. Well, that's all well and good, but can we trust the RAND Corporation to tell us the truth about their process? So we look at what are other people saying about the RAND Corp? Well, MediaBiasFactCheck.com says that the RAND Corp is on this scale from extreme left to extreme right. They're pretty close to least biased in the middle, and their reputation for factual reporting is very high. Then from the Wikipedia article, this was cited to Harvard University article. It said that there are 32 recipients of the Nobel Prize in the fields of economics and physics who have been associated with the RAND Corporation at some point in their career. So the Nobel Prize is a good indicator for highly respected scientists, especially in the field of economics and physics. The Peace Prize can be a bit of a popularity contest, but the sciences are still pretty good indicators of good scientific work that are being done. And in this case, this company that's existed for 70 years or so has had 32 recipients of the Nobel Prize. That speaks pretty highly to their reputation and their strength in research and science. So that's who they are, right? So then the next question is, why are they sharing the media? Are they getting paid? Well, on that website, you can get the PDF and it says download free electronic document. So they're not getting paid per click, Another thing we look at when we wonder if they're being paid, we go back to this homepage, is we look for advertisements on the website. In this case, there are none. They only show their own links for how to download the material. So no, they're not getting paid per click. So how are they getting paid? Who paid for the work? Somebody had to pay for all these researchers to get together. So what does the RAND Corporation do? They publish consolidated financial statements, which you could also get for free every year. They publish annual reports that discloses where they're doing research, what areas of research they're doing, and who's paying for it. And on this specific report, it says funding for the research was provided by unrestricted gifts from RAND supporters and income from operations. So there was no one single entity that was behind funding this. If there had been, then it would say the research funding for the research was provided by a grant from X agency, whatever that agency might be. So, given this information, now we know who the people are and that they're generally highly educated in the proper types of fields to do this kind of research. We know they're not being paid per click. We know that they're not being paid by any one particular entity that might have some bias that would bleed through. So we're feeling pretty good about this so far. So then we ask, well, what is the purpose of the media? What's the purpose of this article? Well, they tell you in the abstract. It says this report, part of the Countering Truth Decay initiative, describes how the authors synthesized myriad existing standards using the lens of truth decay. And then it goes on to identify a single concise set of ML, that's media literacy standards. So they're out here trying to develop a single set of media literacy standards. The methodology goes on to say that they examined about, I think it said more than 200 or 250 articles that each suppose their own set of standards. And the point of this article is to synthesize down just a few standards so they can actually be used by teachers. So the next question, we know who, we know how, we know what. So now the question is, how did they develop the media? We know how they paid for it. Now, how did they develop it? Well, there's an appendix that goes with the article that's linked right underneath the article. It's also available for free, that specifically lays out the methodology, the references, all the sources of the raw material, the funding source, and also has a statement from the authors that says what the reasons for the article were. So they're being very open about all of that information. And based on how they're getting paid, which is from general donations, we don't really, there's no big reason to doubt any of that information. So finally, we ask ourselves, what does the author in this case want me to do? And from reading the article, which is linked at the end of this PowerPoint, it is that they want us to gain media literacy skills, learn to share those skills. They want us to believe that media literacy is important, and they want us to combat truth decay. So it's up to us to decide whether or not we agree with those goals and how we can, whether or not we accept that material. And then the last slide, and I'll share this with you, Sandy. I don't know if you published these slides or not, but I've got a little bibliography there that's got some of the information that I looked at to put this all together. We're over time, but any questions for me about how to look at some of these things that we find on the internet? No? Everybody's very glazed over right now because they don't know whether they should trust me after I've told everybody not to trust anybody. Okay.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. It might be information overload too. That was a
It
lot
might be,
of
yeah.
information.
Sorry. There are whole curricula, like 25 class curricula that deal with this, and it was
Wow.
really difficult to synthesize it down. So I apologize. But like I said, I'll share the PowerPoint to you, Sandy, and I don't know how you publish it, but you know, if you
Thank
want to,
you. Yeah, that'd be great. And I think that you shared some great information. It was very informative. I enjoyed it, and hopefully they got some nuggets out of it. I'm sure they did. Thank you so much. And like you said, we are a little over time. And Grace, did you have a question?
When the author of the media is grinning maniacally and telling you you can't have cookies, they're generally lying.
is that right? Okay.
A statement, not a question, but that works too. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. And thank you again for presenting for us tonight, Terrence, and I greatly appreciated your time. And thank you. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks very much. All right.
Bye.
Bye.